Okay, good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our final English kindergarten drop-in session of the ONlit contract year. This evening, we will be talking about phonemic awareness. First thing we will do is our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that ONLIT's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work on this land, and we are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people for their care for and teachings about the earth. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and to the ancestral lands on which we learn, work, and live. If you are new to ONLIT, we are a collaboration between Dyslexia Canada and the International Dyslexia Association branch of Ontario, and we are funded by the Ministry of Education. Note that ONLIT views are what we are presenting today, not necessarily the views of the Ministry of Education. We have the amazing Lauren Addison from the Trillium Lakelands District School Board with us today, one of our fantastic ONLIT kindergarten team members, to present on phonemic awareness. That will be followed by a Q&A. I have a from the mailbag question that I've received a lot lately that I will address, and then we'll see if other viewers have questions in the chat. So you may want to save them till the end. Sometimes people put questions in the chat and Lauren may answer them as she goes, so you might want to hold those until we get to the Q&A portion. We'll share what's coming up, and then we will share that survey link for the prize. And I will turn things over now to Lauren to talk to us all about phonemic awareness. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for having me tonight. Um, so let's just get started. So on February 28th, 2022, the Right to Read report was released after a 2-year inquiry, and within it there were 157 recommendations for ministries of education, school boards, and faculties of education. Within this report, it said that decades of multidisciplinary research has shown that the best way to teach all students to read words is through direct, explicit, systematic instruction in foundational word reading skills. Beginning in kindergarten, this includes explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, and using these to sound out words and to spell words. Phonemic awareness is a foundational skill that supports children learning to read and spell. The panel found that children who learn to read through instruction that included focused phonemic awareness instruction improved their reading skills more than children who learned without attention to phonemic awareness. The panel also found that approaches to phonemic awareness were effective in teaching reading and spelling and moved quickly from oral phonemic awareness to teaching children to blend sounds and segment words while using the corresponding letters. If we want to visualize how all these literacy skills come together, one of the best models for that is Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. What makes this visual so powerful is that it reminds us that reading is incredibly complex. The rope shows us that reading is not just about the mechanical act of sounding out words, and it's not just about making sense of language. It requires both of those elements weaving together. In the bottom portion of the rope, you'll see that phonological awareness portion. And as we discussed earlier, this is a critical piece of the strand. This visual highlights why we spend so much time on it. It's an early, completely vital literacy skill. By strengthening this single strand of the rope early on, we're directly supporting a student's ability to decode words later. This is a foundational thread, and if it's weak, the entire rope will be compromised. Educators often hear the term phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, and it's easy to blur these two together. We can see that on the left-hand side of the umbrella, there are skills like identifying syllables, rhyming, alliteration, and onset and rhyme. The ability to hear and manipulate spoken parts of words and sentences. But on the right-hand side of the umbrella, that's the part that we really want to focus on. This is the ability to identify and manipulate the individual phonemes or sounds in spoken words. So things like identifying individual sounds, segmenting sounds, blending, and manipulating. Phonemic awareness is what creates that aha moment for our students. It helps them realize that spoken words isn't just a solid block of noise, it's made up of those individual phonemes. So let's see how this all works in practice, and we're going to anchor ourselves in the word dog. So we can see here that one of the skills that they need to work on is isolating the initial sound. And that may sound like saying, can you tell me the first sound in the word dog? And the student producing the sound D. Then we move to the more complex skill of isolating a final phoneme. In the word dog, the final phoneme would be G. An additionally increasingly complex skill would be identifying that medial sound. So in the word dog, it would be ah, and then blending phonemes together, D, ah, G, to produce the word dog. And finally, segmenting those phonemes, giving the student the word dog and asking them to produce each individual phoneme, D, ah, G. What's really important is that we teach these skills explicitly, systematically, and with brief but frequent exposures to the skills. So you'll see at the bottom, we've included some tips about the progression. We want to make sure that we're starting with some continuous sounds. Sounds like and s, which we can hold on to, are easier for students to blend versus stop sounds like b and t. We also want to make sure that when we're modeling this for students and when they're producing the sounds, that we're clipping that schwa, that we're not saying p, but we're saying p, to make sure that it's easier for them to blend. So what phonic or phonemic awareness is not? Again, sometimes we hear those terms phonemic awareness and phonics, and it's hard to decipher the difference between the two of them. Phonemic awareness can be done in the dark. It's auditory and it's oral. What sounds do you hear at the beginning of the word ship? Shh. We can do that without seeing the actual grapheme. But once we move to phonics, that's when we're incorporating the grapheme into into the activities that we're doing. So what letters are at the beginning of the word ship? SH, and they would represent that shh sound. We want to be clear that as soon as possible, we want to start mixing the phonemes and the graphemes together. So there is a really important link between those two things. I have a little video here of an activity. Oh, hold on. Of an activity that I've done with students in my classroom. You can see up at the top, there is a pipe cleaner just with 3 beads on them. At the beginning, when we're just working with sounds, I would have my students moving those beads one at a time as they say the sounds in a word. So if I said to them, can you tell me the sounds in ship? They would move one bead as they said shh, one as they said eh, and another as they said p. Later on, with a student who was ready for it, I was also incorporating letters into that activity so that they were connecting the phoneme and the grapheme together. And this is an example of a student doing that. So she's able to hear those sounds as she says them and blend them together to make the word. So phonemic awareness is one of the most advanced types of phonological awareness, and it's a critical skill for advancing children's early decoding and spelling skills. Larger phonological sensitivity skills like rhyming, working with syllables, alliterations do not need to be assessed, taught, or mastered before we move on to teaching students about phonemes. Instruction in phonemic awareness has the greatest impact on phonological awareness teaching, on reading and spelling for all children, including children at risk for decoding difficulties. This makes sense as children need to learn the links between phonemes and graphemes, to blend individual sounds to read words, and to segment words into sounds to represent them with letters when encoding. Incorporating letters as early as possible when students have learned grapheme phoneme associations into instruction and teaching children how to blend and segment phonemes is more effective for increasing children's phonemic awareness, decoding, and spelling skills. Here we have an example of a sound wall. You can see that the sound wall is located close to the teaching area for easy access during phonics lessons so that we were able to reference it. Here's a closer look, and this is a sound wall that I had in my room about 5 years ago. So I will preface this by saying I probably would set it up differently now than I had then, but I've been out of the classroom for a couple years and I didn't have an up-to-date photo. So sound walls can be incredibly helpful tools. They're not research-based, so there isn't one correct way to do them. In my kindergarten classroom, I had it set up in this way, broken up into the types of sounds. You can see that there were locks on top of sounds that we had not yet introduced. So as that code was introduced, we would unlock it. You'll also notice that I don't have a vowel valley. I chose not to put one up because many of the sounds within the vowel valley were not sounds that would be introduced to my students in the scope and sequence in kindergarten. So in order not to overwhelm them, I chose to only put up the sounds that they were going to encounter throughout the year. I also chose to put up my entire wall right from the beginning because kindergarten is a 2-year program, and many of my year 2 students were ready for lots of encoding and they needed access to the sound wall, but we did expose letters as we got to them. Other programs have different layouts for their sound wall. And like I said before, they're not research-based, so there is no set way in which you need to do it. For me, the important thing was drawing their attention to the shape of their mouth. We often used mirrors within our lessons so that they could see and recognize what their mouth was doing while they were making sounds. And I found that this really helped them later on when they were trying to encode words. If we look at the new curriculum, we're going to find phonemic awareness under Strand A, Foundations for Language and Mathematics. There are 3 specific expectations which mention phonemes. The first is A 2.3, where students need to isolate and blend phonemes and segment simple words into phonemes. A 2.4, identify simple grapheme phoneme correspondences. And A 2.5, read and spell simple words using phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge. A great resource on the digital curriculum platform is the Language Foundations Continuum. This is a great tool because it tells us not only where our students are in kindergarten, but where they'll be going as they enter grade 1. The skills develop along a progression, so they're not limited just to the grade with which our student is in. We can see reaching back and reaching forward where they're going to be going, and it shows that these skills are cumulative. So you can see here that in kindergarten, students will be working on isolating the phonemes they hear in words, which is an important skill to support segmentation. We hope that this skill will be consolidated within kindergarten, which is why there is nothing to show what would happen in grade 1. So we want students identifying phonemes orally in spoken words by isolating first sounds, last sounds, and medial sounds, and noticing and describing the oral motor movements used to produce the sound, which goes back to my discussion about mirrors and how important those were for my students. When we move to orally blending phonemes, you can see that this is a skill that they will begin working on in kindergarten, but will continue working on in grade 1 with more complexity. So in kindergarten, they're going to be orally blending VC, CV, CVC, and CCVC, CVCC words. Once we get into grade 1, they're going to be orally blending phonemes with up to 5 phonemes in them. And then we move to segmenting sounds. So segmenting spoken words into phonemes, starting with simple structures with 2 phonemes and progressing to more complex structures in kindergarten, whereas in grade 1, they're segmenting spoken words with structures that have more than 2 phonemes. So to recap some of the things that we've talked about, within our classroom, we want to make sure that when we're teaching phonemic awareness, that we're being explicit and intentional. These skills must be directly taught, not just picked up, and we want to do them in short, focused daily instruction to be most effective. We're going to use a gradual progression with lots of I do, we do, you do. So we're modeling for our students how to do this, doing it with them, and then giving opportunities for them to do it on their own with lots of opportunities for practice and corrective feedback from the educator. We want to move from two sound words to three sound words, building complexity both in the amount of sounds we give them, but also in skills such as starting with isolating sounds, blending sounds, segmenting sounds, and then manipulating sounds. And we also want to make sure that when we're ready, we're integrating with phonics. We don't want to stay in the dark. We want to start connecting those phonemes to graphemes. For example, after hearing the sound connecting it to the letter M. And we want to observe and respond. We want to use the continuum to notice where our students are and plan next steps, and also use our interactions with students and our assessments to plan next steps to support growth and movement. When I was working with my students, lots of use of our bodies to ensure we are getting concepts. When I'm segmenting with my students, we're often using our fingers to count. So if I said, tell me the sounds in the word cat, they would say k, at. Sometimes people use their arm and do the first sound at their shoulder, the middle sound at their elbow, and the last sound at their wrist. And other people do it with body actions like head, torso, and knees or feet to differentiate that initial, medial, and final sound. So the question sometimes becomes, where do I fit all of this within my daily routine? And ONlit has a wonderful sample flow of the day that you can look at if you're interested in how you can incorporate all of the things into your program. We want to remember those key points about keeping it explicit, systematic, brief, and frequent. And we also want to remember that instructional hierarchy, where we want to give students opportunities where they're getting direct instruction to acquire a skill, and then being provided with many, many opportunities to build fluency with a skill before we move on. So in terms of whole group learning with phonemic awareness, I used UFly in my classroom, and built into this program is phonemic awareness. That step one in UFly offers a quick warm up for your students to get them ready for the rest of the lesson. At the beginning, in step one, you will be blending and segmenting up to 4 different words. And this is enough practice throughout the day to get them ready to move on. We also want to make sure that we're optimizing every moment within the day. We want to make sure there's no wasted time. So one thing that I like to do is build phonemic awareness into transitions where possible. In this video, I have a sample. This was an idea from the lovely Kate Wynn, where my students are coming in and out of the classroom. And each time they're coming in and out of the classroom, I would either stop them and ask them for a sound, or eventually we built in this activity where the graphemes were on the door frame and they were producing the sound. So this is when students are ready to layer on that grapheme component. But here's a little video of them coming in and out of the door. So at that time in my board, the expectation was that we were producing, or we were teaching 4 sounds a week. We know better now and we're doing 2 sounds a week. But at that time there were 4. So each week I would put up the 4 new sounds. And every time they came in and out of the door, they would stop and do that. It was a great opportunity for repetition, lots of practice for them. It also gave me an indication as I watched to see who was producing those sounds accurately and who wasn't. And then I could follow up with them later. As students progress through the year, we move from individual sounds to blending sounds together. So this was a pocket chart that was put on the door, and they could just walk up, touch the 3 sounds, and blend the word together to tell me what it was. At the end of the day, when we were outside waiting for buses or for parents to pick up, we love to play I Spy. But instead of saying I spy with my little eye something that is green, we would say I spy with my little eye something that begins with the sound B. and students would give me answers. Again, I can quickly see in that moment who knows how to isolate that first sound and produce a word that begins with that sound and who doesn't. During small group activities, there are lots of opportunities to build in phonemic awareness. In my class, we always did a soft start, so that was a great opportunity to pull individual kids or to work with a small group of kids. Or you can see throughout that sample flow of the day, there are lots of opportunities where educators are working with students or students are at play. And this sound detective activity is one where we would pick a letter sound. In this case, it was B. And I would ask them to go around the room, find an item that started with that sound, and bring it to me. Immediately, I could see had they brought me an item that did start with that sound, or were they still working on isolating that first sound to bring me an item. Mystery bag or box is another great activity that we did in our class. This can be done with a large group of kids. In some guided play with them. It can be done individually. The kids love to play this game by themselves afterward on the carpet after we'd done it as a group. But basically, what it is I would put a number of items into a box or a bag. The students would come to the carpet and they would pull out an item, and I would ask them to produce the first sound. This is a great activity because it offers multiple entry points for my kids who were a little bit more apprehensive about giving me a sound. They could look in the box and find an item that they were confident they knew the first sound of. I could also challenge other students to tell me, well, what's the last sound in that word? Or what can you tell me all of the sounds that that word makes? So here's a little video of them playing that activity.
Let's see what you pick out. What did you get?
Octopus.
Octopus. What sound do you hear at the beginning of octopus?
And she was able to tell me that that was O. Again, during small group activities, this was one that, again, we're building in those graphemes with the activity, but she would see a picture. She would have to tell me all of the sounds in that word, and then she was writing down the letters. I love incorporating little picture cards like this. They're really versatile. So if I pulled out that card with the map on it, I could ask a student to tell me the first sound they heard. I could ask for the last sound, the middle sound. I could ask them to tell me all the sounds they heard in that word. If they were ready, I could get them to encode that word. So they're really versatile and offer lots of ways to incorporate them throughout the day. This is another example of a small group activity. This is a student who is listening for those sounds. This was sent to me by a DCE who...
Just a second.
I just got a new marker and it's not working. Ow. What is this? Miss Singleton handed it out for Lily. Hey, Miss Singleton.
Just a second. Good watch.
So you can see her there looking at the picture, seeing a horse and thinking to herself, what's the first sound in that word, and writing it down. So this could be done just orally for those who aren't ready to be writing letters down. This student was in year 2 and she was ready to be doing that. I love using Elkanim boxes as well because they're also really versatile. They offer the opportunity to gradually increase the complexity of them. So in this first example, I would have my Elkanim box out with my picture and then just cubes. And I'm just asking the student to produce the sound. So they're telling me that that word is cat and the sounds are k, at. As they're ready, we can start adding or layering on the grapheme to that activity. And then further to that, I could have them actually then writing down the words and working on their letter formation to build more complexity into that activity. And phonemic awareness doesn't just have to be done inside, it can also be done outside during outdoor play. So I have 2 videos here. In the first one, this student is producing first sounds, matching them to the grapheme. And in the second one, the student is working on segmenting and blending. Oh.
Cat. Fun. Hot.
I've also done it just with 3 hula hoops with no letters attached to it and just given them a word and then they would hop in one hula hoop for each activity or for each sound that they produce. Um, and now I want to highlight what this looks like in terms of assessment. So we know that phonemic awareness is the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual sounds in spoken words, and that it's one of the most critical predictors of early reading success. In year 2 in Ontario, we are to be screening our students using a ministry approved screener. I started using Acadience in my classroom in around 2021. And the Acadience screener measures 2 phonemic awareness skills. The first is first sound fluency, in which we ask if students can isolate the first sound in a word. And the second is phoneme segmentation fluency. Can they identify all of the sounds in a word? So we know that with screeners, there's a moving target. So we want to, best practice would be to be screening 3 times a year so that we can monitor student progress and see where they are at as those benchmarks change over the year. We want to make sure that they're staying on track as skills become more complex and benchmarks increase. So to highlight some data, we are going to look at one student in my class from several years ago. So this student came to me in her second year of kindergarten. And when she came to me, she didn't know any letter names and she wasn't able to isolate any letter sounds. She's that third little one from the bottom, and everyone other than the little guy above her I'd had in year 1. So she was new to me, and right away, this indicated to me that she was struggling with some phonemic awareness skills. So what we decided to do was pay close attention to that and start to intervene right away, also progress monitoring her as we went. In order to intervene there, we used that explicit, systematic, frequent, and brief intervention strategy. So I would take any opportunity I had throughout the day to pull her aside. We did a soft start. So when she came in the morning, I would quickly grab her and we would do a few first sound activities. During transitions, I would make sure that she was somebody that I stopped in line and just said to her, "Hey, do you know the first sound in the word mouse? Do you know the first sound in the word fence? Do you know the first sound in the word bed?" And then I would move on. It was quick, it was brief, it was effective, and I was able to see in that moment whether she was picking up that skill. But at the beginning of the year, she was definitely well below benchmark. When we moved to middle of the year, we could see that she had increased, but she was not yet at benchmark. So we continued that progress monitoring with first sound fluency. And within a couple of weeks, we were able to get her where she was. But our work with phonemic awareness wasn't just supporting her first sound fluency, it was also supporting her phoneme segmentation fluency. So she didn't start that skill in the red. She was already in the yellow, just below benchmark. So once we were able to make sure that she was at benchmark for first sound fluency, we moved on to working more strategically with phoneme segmentation fluency, and we began progress monitoring that. You can see that from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, it did increase, but it was still something that we wanted to pay attention to. And then I also had to keep a close eye on that little guy above her. By the end of the year, she had moved on from first sound, which we were able to determine with the progress monitoring, and she successfully reached benchmark with her phoneme segmentation fluency, and her overall composite score was at benchmark too. So it was really about targeting the skill that she needed to work on, making sure we were giving lots of opportunities for practice and for feedback from us multiple times throughout the day, progress monitoring her to make sure she was making the gains we were hoping that she was making. And when she wasn't making the gains, that was informative to us that we needed to change either the intensity, the frequency, or the duration with which we saw her to help get her to where she needed to be as quickly as possible. And you can see there, she was at benchmark for all by the end of the year. I just want to highlight some resources that I've used for some of my own learning and also within my classroom. We have the embedded picture mnemonic cards from ONlit. They're great because they allow you to scaffold learning for all of your students. They have the mnemonic on the front and then just the letter on the back. So as they're ready, they can move on to that. I use these with lots of my students where I produce a set just for that individual student, and we would sit and go through the cards, and I could quickly assess which ones they knew and which ones they didn't, and create piles of known letters and known sounds and unknown sounds, and we could focus on building their knowledge for those unknown sounds, and then move on to connecting it to the grapheme without the mnemonic attached. And also, ONlit has a great section on their website where you can learn more about phonemic awareness in kindergarten and complete that module. It's something I highly recommend because there's lots of great information in that module for you to take a peek at.
Thank you, Lauren. Wow, that was a lot of information to fit into a short period of time. That was amazing. If you have any questions, start thinking about those while I first begin with a from the mailbag question that I have been receiving a lot since the new kindergarten curriculum document came out. So if we could go to the next slide, Lauren. A lot of people have been asking me, now that we have the new kindergarten curriculum, where should we stop teaching in UFly? So a couple things to talk about first is we know that not all kindergarten classes in Ontario are using UFly. Some are using the Phonics Companion or Flyleaf. Some maybe don't even have an explicit and systematic phonics program yet and are still deciding on that. So that said, I totally understand that UFly doesn't apply to everyone, but I have heard this question many times. The other thing to keep in mind is it is our responsibility as educators to teach the expectations of our curriculum. So I want to go back to the 8 years that I taught grade 3. And we used Math Makes Sense, which was an excellent program. And I say, bring back the textbooks for those older students. But that textbook was designed, it was Canadian, but it was designed to meet the expectations of 3 or maybe 4 provinces. So it didn't align perfectly with the Ontario grade 3 math expectations. So I needed to know my curriculum document. And I knew by the time I got to the second or third year that when the fractions unit came, I didn't have to teach the last 2 lessons because it took fractions a couple of steps further than the actual Ontario curriculum did. I knew when we got to the data management unit, I actually needed to add something in because there was no lesson on mode, whereas mode was an expectation of the Ontario curriculum for grade 3 math, and there was always an EQAO question about it. So you need to know your curriculum. So really, I think the ministry response as well as the ONlit response would be you're responsible for teaching the expectations of the curriculum. Now, if we look at if we go back just a second, Lauren, to the first slide. Yeah. So this is all concepts K to 2 that UFly suggests because it's a 3-year progression with UFly. Now, if you go to the next slide, it shows the bolded parts are what they suggest for kindergarten. And of course, we do remember that this does come from the United States, which does not mean that it's not a good program for our students. They're all learning to read and write in English, but it is usually a 1-year kindergarten program with 5-year-olds that they're talking about. We have different context here in Ontario, right? So that's something as well to keep in mind. But this is what they suggest for the kindergarten scope and sequence. Now, if you go to the third slide, one of our great ONlit team members, Jenny Van Rees, when the Ontario language curriculum for grades 1 to 8 came out, this was before we even had a kindergarten curriculum, but there was a K1 column on the continuum. And so Jenny went through and color coded. So you can see the blue is kindergarten, the green is grade 1, and that yellow is grade 2 from the curriculum. And so I was talking to Jenny just the other day and I said, now that there's actually the curriculum out, have you changed anything? Would you change anything? And really, no, the curriculum aligns with what that continuum predicted for us back when it first came out. So the blue is what's required. Now, some of the pieces, like that alphabet review in the second column, it's a review. And so it's not that those are new lessons we wouldn't teach necessarily, it's just the review pieces. So if you look at that, they suggest going further in UFly suggests, than actually meets the Ontario curriculum. So my personal recommendation, as someone who has taught UFly, this is my 4th year now teaching it, is I stop at lesson 53, because 54 and on, those CVC words, that is in the grade 1 language curriculum. So yes, we could teach that and then it becomes a review in grade 1. But what I find in our context is I'd like to have more time to get through those 53 lessons. You'll notice a couple of those green pieces between 42 and 53. So for example, we wouldn't have to teach the ALL, OLL, ULL lesson, because that is part of grade 1. But if you don't teach it, then those lessons that follow may have words including that pattern. For example, when you're doing the blending drill or if you're doing the decodable text and that sort of thing. So you just have to keep in mind to be flexible there as need be. But for me, getting to 53 seems to really work. I know I've had some educators, board leaders say, well, our teachers are getting to 53 by February or March. That's a lot of time left. And I say, wow, that's great, because I am not at lesson 53 yet, but maybe these boards don't have 20 snow days like we do usually in our board. So if you have all of that time, then certainly you could continue to extend. There's nothing to say that you can't. I usually finish up around the beginning of May, and then I like to have those last few weeks to consolidate. Lauren mentioned the instructional hierarchy. So the idea of not just being able to say, check, 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 I covered all of these lessons, but to be able to say they're not just accurate, they're automatic with all of that. And I talked to the grade 1 teacher and she said, oh yes, they come into grade 1 very well prepared because they are accurate and automatic up to what's appropriate for kindergarten or what we feel is best for our students. I know that I have the responsibility of teaching what's in our new curriculum, and that will do it. That's not to say you can't go farther or you shouldn't go farther. So that wouldn't be our advice. Our advice is just to make sure that you are, using the responsibility that we have to teach the curriculum expectations. Okay, so that is that for that question. For those of you who may have been joining us after the fact by video replay, we would like to thank you for being here.